Starfire erupted across the void as energy cannons tore through the darkness. Inside the cockpit of his F-302 starfighter, Colonel Michael Hayes fought to keep his ship level as the starboard engine howled in protest. The comms channel exploded with panicked voices. Eagle 6 is down. Repeat, Eagle 6 is down. Through the plasma-scorched viewport, Michael watched helplessly as another fighter bearing the Screaming Eagle's insignia spiraled into oblivion, engulfed in blue flame. Mayday, Mayday, this is Colonel Hayes to any coalition forces. I have wounded men stranded on the surface, requesting immediate extraction. The reply came back as nothing but static. Below him, through Alpha Centauri's cloud cover, he could make out the pinpricks of light that marked his stranded ground team surrounded by the advancing Novari forces. Their biosuits glowed like predatory deep-sea creatures in the murky twilight. Michael pushed his craft into a steep dive. If no one was coming, he'd get those men himself. Warning klaxons screamed as the fighter's structural integrity began to fail. A blinding flash of light engulfed him as a Novari plasma bolt found its mark. The cockpit filled with smoke and fire as the control console exploded in his face. The screams of his dying men filled his ears as darkness consumed him. Michael jolted upright in his bunk, the phantom pain of burns still searing his skin. His heart hammered against his ribs as his eyes adjusted to the familiar confines of his quarters aboard the Lone Wolf. Just another nightmare, always the same one. 10 years had passed since the Battle of Alpha Centauri, but in his dreams, he was always back there, always watching his men die, always failing them. He swung his legs over the edge of the bunk and pressed his bare feet against the cold metal deck plates. The chill anchored him to reality. His quarters were Spartan, a military habit he'd never shed. The only personal touch was a faded photograph of the Screaming Eagles mounted on the bulkhead. 24 faces stared back at him, frozen in a moment of camaraderie that existed now only in his memory. Only 3 of those men were still alive, including himself. "Same dream, boys?" he asked the photo, his voice rough from sleep. "Don't worry, I haven't forgotten." A soft, electronic chirp drew his attention as the ship's AI activated the morning protocol. "Good morning, Colonel. Local time is 0600 hours. Current location, Starfall Graveyard, Sector 47. All systems nominal." Michael grunted in acknowledgement. At 68, he still maintained the disciplined schedule of his military days. There was comfort in routine when everything else had been stripped away. The Lone Wolf was a decommissioned coalition patrol vessel, small, maneuverable, and perfect for navigating the hazardous debris fields of what was officially designated as post-war Reclamation Zone 47. Scavengers like Michael just called it the Starfall Graveyard. It was a cosmic junkyard where the ghosts of the Terran-Novari War still drifted in silent testament to mankind's first interstellar conflict. After a quick sonic shower and a breakfast of reconstituted protein, Michael made his way to the bridge. The curved view screen offered a panoramic vista of the graveyard. Massive hulks of dead warships hung, suspended in the void, some Terran, some Novari. Shattered metal and crystalline biostructures reflected the distant starlight like a field of jagged diamonds. A soft meow drew his attention downward. Apollo, an orange tabby with a torn ear and a cybernetic right front leg, wound between his ankles. The cat had been a stowaway on a derelict survey vessel Michael had salvaged 3 months ago. The animal had been half-starved and injured, trapped for who knows how long, with only emergency oxygen systems keeping it alive. "Morning to you too," Michael said, reaching down to scratch behind the cat's organic ear. "Ready for another thrilling day of picking through other people's garbage." Apollo purred in response, then leapt up to his favorite perch on the navigation console. Michael allowed himself a small smile. The cat was the closest thing to a crew he'd had in years. After the war, after Sarah's death from cancer, after David had cut ties with him for re-enlisting solitude, had become both his punishment and his refuge. The scanner array chimed, pulling Michael from his thoughts. A proximity alert indicated a new contact at the edge of the sensor range. He adjusted the settings, focusing the sensors on the unidentified object. The readings fluctuated oddly, suggesting a ship with minimal power but unusual energy signatures. "What do we have here?" Michael murmured, studying the readout. "Something's still alive out there." Apollo's ears perked up as if in response. Michael plotted an intercept course up to him. If there was one thing a scavenger couldn't resist, it was an anomaly. Anomalies meant unique salvage, and unique salvage meant credits. The Lone Wolf's engines hummed to life, propelling the small vessel deeper into the graveyard. As he navigated through the floating debris, Michael felt the familiar tension settle between his shoulder blades. Despite a decade of peace, this place still felt like enemy territory. He'd lost too many friends to the Novari to ever feel completely at ease among their dead ships. The Novari, a race of humanoid aliens with bioluminescent skin patterns and silver eyes, had appeared without warning at the edge of Sol's Oort cloud. Their first communication had been polite but firm. They claimed territorial rights to Alpha Centauri, humanity's first extrasolar colony. When Earth refused to withdraw, diplomacy gave way to warfare unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. The Novari fought with living ships, massive bioorganic vessels that seemed to breathe and heal and adapt. Their weapons fired plasma that burned through conventional armor like paper. Their warriors wore biosuits that enhanced their natural abilities to terrifying levels. For 2 bloody years, humanity had been on the back foot, losing ground, losing ships, losing lives. Only a desperate gamble, the deployment of experimental quantum disruptors that targeted the unique cellular structure of Novari biotech, had finally turned the tide. Michael's scanner beeped again, indicating he was approaching the unidentified vessel. He slowed the Lone Wolf to a crawl and activated the external floodlights. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the derelict. "Well, I'll be damned," Michael whispered. It was unmistakably Novari in origin, a thorn ship by the look of it. Smaller than their massive war arcs, but still impressive, its hull resembled an enormous seed pod with vicious thorn-like protrusions. The once vibrant organic hull was now gray and petrified, damaged by weapons fire and time. But unlike the other Novari wrecks in the graveyard, this one showed signs of active systems. Faint bioluminescence pulsed along what remained of its spinal ridge. Michael ran a full-spectrum analysis. The energy readings were unusual, weak, but persistent, like a failing heartbeat. And there was something else, a biological signature. Not the harmonic resonance typical of Novari vessels, but something discordant, almost feverish. "What are you still doing out here, you beautiful wreck?" Michael murmured, his scavenger's instinct warring with military caution. Protocol dictated that he tag the location and report it to Coalition Reclamation. Active Novari tech was still classified as restricted salvage, requiring special handling teams. But curiosity and the lure of a significant payday won out. If he could recover even a fraction of the ship's biosystems intact, the payoff would be substantial. Michael guided the Lone Wolf into a parallel trajectory and engaged the magnetic docking clamps. The 2 vessels connected with a deep, reverberating thud that echoed through his hull. Michael made his way to the airlock, donning his EVA suit with practiced efficiency. The suit was a Scavenger's modified rig standard Coalition issue, hardened with additional armor plating and equipped with enhanced sensors. He checked the seals, twice, a habit that had saved his life more than once. He hesitated at the weapons locker, then made his decision. From a padded case, he removed an ancient M1911 pistol, a family heirloom that his grandfather had carried through the Second World War. The weapon was nearly 2 centuries old, but meticulously maintained. Its ammunition was custom-made armor-piercing rounds designed to punch through even Novari bioarmor. In a universe of energy, weapons, and plasma rifles, there was something reassuring about cold steel and lead. "Hold down the fort," Michael told Apollo, who watched curiously from atop a storage crate. "I won't be long." The airlock cycled, and Michael stepped into the umbilical connector that now linked the 2 ships. His boots magnetized to the metal floor, preventing him from drifting in the microgravity. The air recyclers in his suit hummed quietly as he approached the Novari vessel's entry point. Unlike Terran ships with their mechanical doors and hydraulic systems, Novari vessels used organic apertures, iris-like openings of sinew and cartilage that responded to genetic markers. This one was partially open, its edges blackened, as if from an internal energy surge. Michael shined his tack light through the gap. The beam cut through floating particles of desiccated biomatter, creating an eerie snow globe effect. Michael squeezed through the damaged iris, entering the alien ship. The difference was immediate and visceral. Even in its dormant state, the Novari vessel felt alive. The interior was a cathedral of organic technology, walls formed of latticed, bone-like structures interwoven with what appeared to be massive, dormant, vascular systems. Dim phosphorescent moss grew in the crevices, casting the corridor in an ethereal blue-green twilight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sharp metallic tang of alien blood. Michael's suit sensors detected traces of oxygen. The ship was maintaining a minimal life support environment. That was unusual. Most derelict Novari vessels lost atmospheric integrity within days of power failure. He moved cautiously, his tack light cutting sharp white beams through the gloom. Years of military training kept his movements precise and his senses alert. The ship was unnervingly silent. No hum of engines, no whisper of air circulators. Just the occasional creak of the organic structure adjusting to the lone wolf's presence. Michael passed chambers filled with the desiccated husks of what had once been nutrient synthesizers, flora-like structures that produce food and oxygen for the crew. He saw the empty shells of Novari flight suits discarded like shed insect skins. This had been a small ship, probably with a crew of no more than 5 or 6. As he moved deeper into the vessel, the biosignal on his scanner grew stronger, pulling him toward what the Novari called the synaptic throne, their equivalent of a bridge. The entrance was sealed by an iris of fibrous tissue partially open like the external hatch, but with edges that appeared to have been forced. Michael raised his weapon and slipped through the gap. The bridge was a dome of crystalline material that would have shown the starfield outside when active. Now it was dark and lifeless, save for the occasional flicker of failing console nodes that resembled luminous fungi. And in the center, fused to the synaptic throne, was the source of the biosignal. She was Novari, unmistakably so. Her slender form was athletic, built with the predatory grace characteristic of her species. Her skin, the color of pale moonlight, was covered in intricate patterns that should have glowed with vibrant bioluminescence, but now pulsed weakly with an unstable, sickly light. Deep lacerations across her body wept a fluid that glowed with a soft, golden luminescence. But what froze Michael's blood was not her wounds, but what she was. From her back, arms, and legs, thick root-like cables of biotech burrowed into her flesh before connecting directly to the throne. She wasn't sitting in the command chair. She was an integral part of it, a living component plugged into a dying machine. Her long silver hair floated in the low gravity, framing a face contorted in pain, and on her forehead a delicate pattern of interlocking crystalline structures formed a distinctive mark, the crest of Novari royalty. A high blood, Michael whispered the words bitter in his mouth. The memories crashed over him like a physical wave, the acrid smell of burning flight decks, the screams of his men as they were torn apart by Novari shock troops with glowing eyes and living blades that grew from their arms. He remembered Sergeant Jake Collins, his navigator impaled through the chest as a Novari warrior actually laughed at his dying gasps. He remembered the torture, 6 weeks in a Novari prison cell where they'd used biological agents that peeled back his mind, layer by layer, searching for intelligence on coalition fleet movements. They'd made him relive the deaths of his men over and over, finding entertainment in his anguish. Michael's hand tightened on his pistol, the safety clicking off with an audible snap. His breath came in ragged gasps as hatred and rage flooded his system. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to pull the trigger, to put a hole through the heart of this alien princess. She represented everything he had lost: his men, his career, his family, his peace. His knuckles whitened on the grip as his finger tightened on the trigger. One shot. One moment of vengeance for Jake, for all the screaming eagles, for the man he'd been before the Novari had hollowed him out and left him a shell. Then her eyes opened. They were liquid chrome, swirling with exhaustion and agony. They focused on him, not with the arrogance he expected from Novari royalty, but with a desperate animal terror. Her lips, pale and cracked, parted. "Please." The word was barely audible, a rasp of sound in the silent bridge. "Help me!" Michael's aim didn't waver, but something in his chest did. In his decade of dealing with the Novari, fighting them, being tortured by them, salvaging their dead technology, he had never once heard one say, "Please." They didn't plead. They commanded. They conquered. They did not show weakness. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a low growl inside his helmet. Her head lolled to the side. She seemed to struggle to form words, her consciousness flickering like the dying consoles around them. "Arya," she breathed. "Princess Arya." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Princess Arya Novari, the celestial bloom, youngest daughter of Emperor Thoron and heir to the Novari throne. According to official reports, she had been executed during the internal purges that followed the armistice, a political casualty sacrificed to appease the rising militaristic faction led by her sister Lyra. If this woman was truly Arya, she was the most wanted fugitive in the galaxy, hunted by the new Novari regime that saw her as a symbol of the old imperial ways, and by the Terran coalition that wanted her tried for war crimes committed under her father's rule. "They changed my blood," she stammered, her silver eyes glazing over. "A key to stop them, to stop the next war." Michael let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A key? You're not a key. You're a weapon. Or a target." He shook his head. "Either way, you're not my problem." But he didn't shoot. The soldier in him screamed for vengeance, but the scavenger whispered of opportunity. A living Novari princess, the bounty on her head from either side would be enough to set him up for life. Or he could turn her over to coalition intelligence. They would spend years taking her apart, extracting every secret. It would be a fate worse than death, a fitting end for Novari royalty. He lowered his weapon, but his finger remained on the trigger. His gaze fell to the combat knife sheathed at his belt. It would be so easy, a quick, silent end. Justice for his fallen comrades. But her words echoed in his mind. A key to stop the next war. It was likely a lie, a desperate gambit to survive. But what if it wasn't? There had been whispers in the scavenger community, rumors of a new Novari military buildup, of test flights, of improved war arcs in the outer systems. Another conflict wasn't just possible, it was probable. Michael made his decision not out of mercy but cold pragmatism. She was worth more alive than dead. For now, he holstered his pistol and moved toward the throne. Arya watched him approach, her silver eyes wide with apprehension. She flinched as he reached for the control interface, a tremor running through her body that caused the ship around them to groan in sympathy. "Don't touch me," she hissed, a spark of the royal authority he expected finally showing itself. "You don't have a choice, princess," Michael said flatly. He worked quickly, examining the connection points where her body merged with the ship's systems. The cables fused to her were too thick to cut without specialized equipment, but if he could disengage the primary neural links, she might be able to separate herself. As his gloved hands moved over the alien interface, the ship responded. A deep, resonant hum started to build, vibrating up through the deck plates. The dormant veins in the walls began to pulse with a faint golden light, the same color as the fluid leaking from Arya's wounds. The consoles on the bridge flared to life, alien scripts scrolling rapidly across their surfaces. Arya's eyes shot open wide with alarm. "No, not now," she whispered. "What's happening?" Michael demanded, reaching again for his weapon. "The ship," she gasped, her body arching in pain as energy surged through the systems. "It's responding to me, to the technology in my blood. It's waking up." A sickening, wet tearing sound echoed through the vessel. Michael spun around to look at the entrance to the bridge. The fibrous iris was contracting, sealing itself shut with a final squelching noise. Red alert icons flashed across the consoles. The biohull was hardening, every exit being sealed. Michael ran to the iris, slamming his fist against the tough membrane. It was like hitting solid rock. He was trapped. He turned back to Arya, fury etched into every line of his face. "What did you do?" "Nothing," she cried out, her voice strained. "It's a defensive protocol. It thinks we're under attack." As if on cue, a new sound cut through the rising hum of the ship's engines, not an internal system, but a transmission. A tight beam signal from outside. Michael's wrist computer linked to the Lone Wolf's sensors chirped an alert. A ship had just dropped out of warp space at the edge of the debris field. It wasn't broadcasting any identification codes, but the energy signature of its weapon systems was unmistakable. On one of the newly activated Novari consoles, a schematic appeared. Their ship highlighted in the center, and a few thousand kilometers away, a predator icon, sharp and menacing, closing in fast. A targeting lock indicator began to blink cold and red. "Someone's been hunting you," Michael said grimly, "and now they've found us both." The ship beneath his feet lurched as its ancient bioorganic engines ignited with a guttural roar, the scream of a creature being violently roused from a long slumber. "What about your ship?" Arya asked, panic edging into her voice. Michael's jaw tightened. The Lone Wolf was still docked to the Novari vessel. There was no time to return to it, no time to disengage. Wherever this ship was going, his was coming along for the ride. The universe tore itself apart. There was no other way to describe the jump to warp. It wasn't the clean, sterile transition of a Terran-made drive which folded space with mathematical precision. This was a biological act, violent, visceral, a plunge into nothingness that felt like his very atoms were being unstrung and rethreaded. Michael felt his bones vibrate, his teeth ache. The view screen became a smear of bleeding starlight, a painter's canvas caught in a hurricane. Through the cab, he watched Arya. Her body still fused to the throne was rigid. Her silver hair whipped around her head like a storm cloud, and a soft guttural cry escaped her lips, a sound of equal parts agony and ecstasy. The ship and the princess were one entity experiencing this violation of physics together. The light from her skin intensified, pulsing in time with the ship's shuddering engines, turning the bridge into a nightmare of strobing shadows. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The violent tearing sensation smoothed into a strange frictionless glide. Outside the view screen, normal space had been replaced by a swirling tunnel of incandescent color warp space, but unlike any Michael had seen in his decades of space travel. It felt organic, as if they were traveling through the neural pathways of some cosmic god. The ship's internal gravity stabilized, and Michael found his footing. His heart hammered against his ribs, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the environmental controls of his suit. He looked at Arya, who seemed transformed by the jump. The vacant, pained expression was gone from her eyes, replaced by a sharp, unsettling clarity. The golden glow from her wounds had subsided, and he could see the flesh slowly, unnaturally knitting itself together. Her veins pulsed with a soft internal light, a network of living circuitry beneath her skin. She turned her head, her liquid chrome eyes locking onto his. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips, a predator's smile. She said, her voice no longer a weak rasp, but a melodic, confident alto, was invigorating. I apologize if it was too much for your fragile human physiology. Michael stalked toward her, his face grim. Where are you taking us? We are not going anywhere, Colonel, she corrected, testing her restraints with a casual flex of her fingers. The ship is following an emergency protocol, taking me to the nearest safe harbor. You are merely baggage. Her gaze drifted down his body, lingering for a moment on the pistol at his side. Tell me, is all human military hardware as rigid and unresponsive as its personnel? Michael's jaw tightened. Override it. Arya laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Override my own genetics, a charmingly primitive notion. This ship is an extension of my bloodline. It answers to my subconscious needs, not my verbal commands. And right now, it needs to repair itself. She paused. As do I. He watched as the last of the deep lacerations on her torso sealed over, leaving behind only faint, shimmering lines on her skin like scars made of mother of pearl. Whatever technology was in her blood, it was far beyond the regenerative capabilities of any medical system he'd encountered. You're a monster, Michael said, the words coming out as a low growl. I am a survivor, she countered, her eyes flashing. Something your species struggles with. You do not survive. You merely endure, polluting the galaxy with your noise and your rust until you break. We Novari adapt. We become stronger. It is a concept I would not expect you to grasp. The rage that had been simmering in him since he first recognized her boiled over. In 2 strides, he was standing over her, the barrel of his M1911 pressed against her temple. I have endured things you can't imagine, princess, he hissed, his face inches from hers. I've seen your people turn men inside out for sport. I've watched your living ships feast on the wreckage of ours. Don't lecture me on strength. Her gaze didn't waver. She didn't flinch from the cold metal against her skin. Instead, she leaned into it slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It might have been fear, or it might have been curiosity. And yet here you are, she whispered, her voice a seductive challenge, holding a primitive weapon against the throat of your only hope for survival. How very human of you. She tilted her head, the barrel of the gun sliding along her temple. Are you going to do it? Will you kill me and doom yourself to drift through warp space in a ship you cannot control? Or will you put your toy away and listen? His hand trembled, the desire for vengeance warring with cold logic. She was right. He was trapped. Killing her would be suicide. With a curse, he lowered the gun and stepped back. Talk, he bit out. Arya's smile returned triumphant. As I said before, I am a key. Or rather, I was meant to be a lock, a final ceremonial one. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. There was to be a peace treaty, a binding ritual to solidify the new truce between the rising Navari houses and your coalition dignitaries, an exchange of cultural significance. What kind of ritual? Michael asked, his suspicion growing. A sacrifice, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. My life publicly and ceremoniously ended to appease the factions in my empire who still thirsted for war and to prove to your leaders that the old dynasty was truly over. I was to be the price of peace. Michael stared at her, stunned. He had assumed she was a war criminal, fleeing justice, not a lamb fleeing the altar. But you ran. My life has a purpose beyond being a political statement, she replied sharply. My father, before he was deposed, foresaw the treachery of the new houses. He knew they didn't want peace, they wanted dominance. He embedded this technology into my blood. A failsafe. She flexed her fingers and the golden light beneath her skin pulsed brighter for a moment. The nanobiotics are not just for healing. They carry a cipher, a code that can influence the old imperial network. But the process was incomplete when I was forced to flee. I am unstable. The ship is trying to find a place where I can stabilize myself before this technology either consumes me or burns out entirely. So you're a ticking bomb, Michael concluded. A poetic, if crude assessment. Yes, she gave him a wry look. It is a common human expression, is it not? To bite the bullet. That's not what it means, Michael said, rubbing his temples. The absurdity of the situation was giving him a headache. Why would it not? It seems a terribly inefficient way to, she mused. Surely there are better things to bite. Before Michael could formulate a sarcastic reply, the ship shuddered again. The swirling colors of warp space outside the viewport resolved back into the familiar, stark blackness of normal space dotted with distant stars. A red-tinged gas giant filled the screen, massive storm systems churning across its surface. Orbiting it was a cluster of artificial structures, a sprawling outpost built into and around a collection of asteroids. Lights glittered in the darkness, marking docking bays, habitation modules, and defense installations. It seems we have arrived, Arya announced. Michael recognized the outpost. Its distinctive layout was unmistakable even at this distance. Port Liberty, he said grimly, a black market hub. It is the only place within range that deals in unregulated biotech, Arya explained as the ship maneuvered itself toward a docking cradle carved into one of the larger asteroids. The ship needs a crystalline energy regulator to safely interface with the nanobiotics in my system. Without it, the next jump could overload my cellular structure. She looked down at her bonds where thick cables still connected her to the ship's synaptic throne. I assume you will release me now. I am not an idiot. Her silver eyes met his with a calculating gleam. Then you will have to acquire the component for me. It is a K7 matrix regulator, Novari origin. You will find it in the tech stalls. She paused, a slight smile playing on her lips. And Colonel, try not to be cheated. Your kind is notoriously easy to swindle. Michael weighed his options. Releasing her was not ideal, but leaving her alone was equally problematic. The princess was clearly more than she appeared, and the information she carried both in her mind and in her blood could be vital if another war was truly brewing. First things first, he said firmly. That hunter ship that was tracking you, it could follow us here. We need to know what we're dealing with. Arya nodded toward one of the consoles. The sensor logs are there. The ship identified the pursuer before we jumped. Michael moved to the console, studying the alien symbols. His military training had included basic Navari language skills enough to make sense of their tactical displays. What he saw made his blood run cold. The hunter vessel was a Zendarian Reaver, a hybrid of organic and mechanical technology piloted by a mercenary species known for their relentless tracking abilities. The particular ship's signature identified it as belonging to one specific hunter, Krell the Implacable, a bounty hunter of legendary reputation. If Krell was after Arya, someone was paying an astronomical sum. How long before he follows us? Michael asked. Hours, perhaps, Arya said. The warp signature is masked by the radiation from the gas giant, but it won't hide us forever. Michael made his decision. He found a spare power conduit, and after careful examination of the throne's systems, managed to disconnect the primary biocables from Arya's body. She let out a sharp gasp of pain as the connectors retracted her skin, paling, but the nanobiotics in her bloodstream quickly sealed the wounds. She was free of the throne but still weakened from the ordeal. Michael kept his distance as she struggled to stand on her own, her movements graceful despite her obvious discomfort. "We'll need to disguise you," he said, reaching into his pack for an old gray scavenger's cloak. He tossed it to her. "Cover yourself. Silver eyes and glowing skin tend to attract attention even in a place like Port Liberty." Arya caught the rough fabric with surprising dexterity, wrapping it around her slender form. With the hood casting her face in deep shadow, she looked almost human, a small, fragile figure, rather than the arrogant princess of moments ago. "You're coming with me?" Michael continued, checking the ammunition in his pistol before holstering it. "I don't trust you on this ship alone, and I don't trust you not to try something stupid in port. We go together, we get what you need, and then we figure out our next move." "Our next move?" Arya questioned, her silver eyes glinting from beneath the hood. "I was under the impression you would prefer to hand me over to your coalition authorities at the first opportunity." Michael's expression hardened. "Don't mistake practicality for partnership, princess. Right now you're worth more to me alive than dead. That could change at any moment." The ship docked with a heavy metallic thud. Michael led the way to the airlock area, following close behind. As the outer door cycled open, they were greeted by the distinctive atmosphere of Port Liberty, a sensory assault of industrial chemicals, exotic spices, and the indefinable scent of too many species living in too small a space. The docking bay was a cavernous space carved from the asteroid's rock, its walls lined with maintenance equipment and cargo containers. Other ships of various designs occupied neighboring berths, everything from sleek coalition yachts to cobbled-together scavenger vessels, like the Lone Wolf. "Stay close," Michael instructed, keeping one hand near his concealed weapon as they made their way toward the main concourse. Port Liberty operates on a simple principle: everything's for sale, including people. Keep your hood up and your mouth shut. Arya nodded, pulling the cloak tighter around her shoulders. For once, she didn't offer a sarcastic retort. They passed through a security checkpoint where a bored-looking guard barely glanced at Michael's scavenger credentials. The forged documents identified him as Marcus Wells, a salvage operator from the outer colonies. His military past was buried under layers of false information, a necessary precaution in his line of work. The main concourse of Port Liberty was a chaotic maze of market stalls, bars, and service establishments spread across multiple levels connected by grav lifts and spiral staircases. Holographic advertisements flickered in the air, hawking everything from weapons to companionship. The crowd was a diverse mix of humans and aliens, most keeping to themselves, all with the wary look of people who lived on the edge of legality. Michael scanned the area, getting his bearings. It had been over a year since his last visit to Port Liberty, but the layout remained largely unchanged. The tech stalls would be on the lower levels, where the more specialized and often illegal merchandise was traded. As they descended a metal staircase to the third level, Michael became aware of the attention Arya was attracting despite her disguise. There was something in her bearing, an innate regality that couldn't be completely concealed by a scavenger's cloak. He moved closer to her, projecting a possessive air that would discourage casual interest. "This way," he murmured, steering her toward a dimly lit section of the market where the stalls specialized in salvaged and modified technology. The air here was thick with the scent of ozone and hot metal as vendors demonstrated their wares to potential buyers. They found a stall run by a four-armed Groylan, its shelves overflowing with components of both Terran and alien origin. While Michael haggled with the vendor, attempting to trade a memory core from his last salvage run for the regulator, Arya stood silently behind him, examining the merchandise with veiled interest. He was so focused on the Groylan's attempts to price gouge him that he didn't notice Arya drifting closer to a display of unsecured components. His attention was pulled away by a commotion erupting nearby. Two hulking reptilian thugs with syndicate tattoos on their scaled necks had cornered an elderly man against a wall. It was a classic shakedown. The old man, trembling in a worn Coalition Science Division uniform, clutched a small case to his chest as the thugs loomed over him. Michael's instinct was to ignore it and finish his business, but then one of the thugs shoved the old man to the ground, and something inside Michael snapped. With a sigh, he turned away from the vendor. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a career military officer, "I think the old man has paid his dues for the day." The lead thug grinned, showing a row of needle-sharp teeth. "Mind your business, human, before we decide to take a toll from you too." Michael didn't waste any more words. He moved with the efficient precision of a combat veteran, years of training for riding the aches of age. His first punch was a precise, brutal blow to the thug's throat. As the creature gagged, Michael spun, kicking the second thug's legs out from under him. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol, pressing the barrel against the first thug's head. "Leave," he said, his voice deadly calm. The two scrambled away, vanishing into the crowd. Michael holstered his weapon and turned back to the stall, only to see Arya holding the small crystalline regulator in her hands. The Groylan merchant was staring at the empty space on his shelf, then at Arya, his multiple mouths opening to shout. "I believe our transaction is complete," Arya said smoothly, tucking the component into a fold of her cloak. "Run!" Michael hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the throng. They plunged deeper into the labyrinthine market, the Groylan's enraged shouts echoing behind them. They were almost to the exit when a new voice, amplified and chillingly familiar, cut through the din. 5 million credits for the runaway princess. The bounty is mine." Michael looked up. Standing on a sky bridge above them was a massive figure in obsidian armor, a Zendarion, its natural exoskeleton enhanced with cybernetic implants. It was Krell, the bounty hunter from the debris field. Somehow he had followed them faster than expected. The hunter raised a heavy plasma rifle and fired a warning shot into the ground near their feet, sending sparks flying. Panic erupted in the market as the bounty amount registered with the crowd. 5 million credits was a king's ransom. Suddenly, every smuggler and mercenary in the vicinity was looking at them with eyes filled with greed. "This way," Michael yelled, shoving Arya down a narrow side passage as blaster bolts began to fly from all directions. It was a desperate flight through service corridors and maintenance tunnels, Michael firing his pistol to provide cover as they ran. They were 100 meters from the docking bay when a stray shot ricocheted off a bulkhead and struck Arya in the shoulder. She cried out, stumbling, the impact tearing the cloak from her and sending it fluttering to the grimy floor. In the dim light of the corridor, her skin began to glow with a soft, ethereal luminescence, the faint patterns beneath its surface pulsing brightly. Her blood glowing gold seeped from the wound. There was no longer any doubt about her identity. A collective gasp went through the crowd that had been pursuing them. It really was her, the celestial bloom, alive and bleeding in their midst. Krell landed on the ground in front of them, blocking their path. "Nowhere left to run, Your Highness." But Arya was already moving. With a surge of adrenaline, she spun, using a piece of broken pipe as a whip, catching the hunter's rifle and tearing it from his grasp. It was the opening Michael needed. He lunged forward, slamming at his shoulder into the hunter's chest, sending the larger being staggering backward. He dragged Arya the last few meters onto the boarding ramp of the Novari ship just as it began to retract of its own accord. The ship's engines roared to life, unleashing a wave of energy that sent the crowd scattering. Michael sealed the outer door as the ship lifted off blaster fire, pinging harmlessly against its bioorganic hull. A moment later, they were clear, accelerating into the blackness of space. Through a viewport, Michael could see his own ship, the Lone Wolf, still securely docked to the Novari vessel like a remora on a shark. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the thrum of the engines and Arya's pain breathing. She had collapsed against the wall of the airlock, clutching her wounded shoulder. The nanobiotics in her system were already at work, golden light pulsing around the injury as the cells began to regenerate. His hatred for her people was still a fire in his gut. But layered over it now was a confusing, unwelcome sense of respect. She had shown courage and quick thinking in their escape. She was his prisoner, his asset, his problem, but she was proving to be more complex than the monster of his nightmares. With a heavy sigh, Michael knelt down. He opened a medical kit from his scavenger pack, his movements brisk and impersonal. "Hold still," he ordered, his voice rougher than he intended. He cut away the torn fabric around her wound. Despite himself, he found he had to be gentle, his fingers brushing against her strangely warm, faintly glowing skin. She hissed in pain as he applied antiseptic, but she didn't pull away. As he worked, dressing the wound with a regeneration patch, he saw the intricate, shimmering patterns on her skin up close. They were beautiful, like a star chart written in living light. He finished his work and stood up, avoiding her gaze. He felt her eyes on him, but he didn't acknowledge it. He had fought for her. He had saved her. He still didn't understand why. He turned to leave the airlock and head for the bridge. He needed the cold logic of a ship's console to clear his head. He had to figure out where they were going next, how to stay ahead of Krell and the other hunters who would now be swarming the space lanes. As he reached the doorway, her voice soft and tired stopped him. "Thank you, Michael." It was the first time she had used his name rather than his rank. He didn't turn around. He didn't reply. He simply stood there for a long moment in the silent corridor of the alien ship, more conflicted and uncertain than he had been in years. The Novari ship cut through the darkness of space, its organic engines pulsing with an eerie rhythm that reminded Michael of a heartbeat. On the bridge, he studied the unfamiliar controls, trying to make sense of the living technology that surrounded him. Unlike the mechanical precision of Terran vessels, everything here felt fluid, intuitive, almost sentient. The navigation console wasn't programmed, it was grown. They had escaped Port Liberty by the skin of their teeth, but Michael harbored no illusions about their safety. Krell the Implacable hadn't earned his nickname by giving up after one failed attempt. The bounty hunter would be back, and he wouldn't be alone. 5 million credits would attract every mercenary and opportunist in the sector. Michael glanced at the external monitors. The Lone Wolf remained securely docked to the Novari vessel, a comforting sight amid the alien surroundings. His ship represented security, familiarity, an escape route if things went south. He'd managed to transfer Apollo to the Novari vessel during their brief respite after escaping Port Liberty. The orange tabby now prowled the organic corridors with cautious curiosity, occasionally batting at the bioluminescent growths that served as the ship's lighting system. Arya entered the bridge, moving with a silent grace that seemed almost preternatural. The wound on her shoulder was nearly healed, leaving only a faint pearlescent scar. She had found clothing in one of the ship's storage compartments, a simple gray tunic that hugged her slender form, emblazoned with symbols of the old Novari Empire. "We are being followed," she announced without preamble. Michael tensed his hand, instinctively moving toward his pistol. Krell terms. "No." Arya moved to the navigation console, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced familiarity. "A Coalition patrol vessel. They are maintaining distance, but their sensors are actively scanning us." Michael frowned. Coalition patrols were rare in this sector. They must have picked up our energy signature when we left Port Liberty. A living Novari ship isn't exactly inconspicuous. Indeed, Arya's silver eyes narrowed as she studied the readout. "They are transmitting our position. More ships will come. Then we need to disappear," Michael said grimly. "Can this ship mask its signature better?" Arya placed her palm on a pulsating node near the helm controls. "It can change it." The ship shuddered, and Michael watched in fascination as the bioorganic hull began to shift its cellular structure. The external sensor showed the vessel's profile morphing, its distinctive, thorn-like protrusions retracting into a smoother, more conventional shape. Even the energy signature was changing, cycling through various patterns until it settled on something that could pass for a standard merchant vessel. "Impressive," Michael admitted reluctantly. "Your people's biotech never ceases to amaze and terrify." "Evolution favors adaptation," Arya replied simply. Michael studied her as she worked. In the blue-green light of the bridge, with her silver hair and luminescent skin, she looked like a creature from ancient mythology rather than a flesh-and-blood being. It was hard to reconcile this woman with the monsters that had haunted his nightmares for a decade. "Why did you steal the regulator?" he asked suddenly. "I was in the middle of negotiating for it. We could have avoided that entire fiasco." Arya didn't look up from the console. "Negotiation was taking too long. Krell would have found us regardless. I merely expedited our departure and nearly got us killed in the process. Yet here we are," she countered, a slight smile playing on her lips, "still breathing." Michael shook his head in exasperation. "Are all Novari royals this arrogant, or are you a special case?" "Arrogance implies unwarranted confidence," Arya said, finally turning to face him. "I prefer to think of it as accurate self-assessment." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft electronic chirp from the console. Arya's expression changed, the playful defiance replaced by focused intensity. "The Coalition vessel is no longer following us. They've changed course." "That's good news," Michael said, though his instincts told him otherwise. "No," Arya said, her voice dropping. "It means they've handed the pursuit to someone else, someone closer." She manipulated the controls, expanding the sensor range. "There. 3 vessels approaching from different vectors. They're attempting to box us in." Michael leaned over her shoulder, studying the tactical display. Mercenary ships, heavy armament, minimal life support, bounty hunters. Krell has friends, Arya murmured. Krell doesn't have friends, Michael corrected. He has competitors. The ship suddenly lurched, alarms blaring as the first shots struck their aft section. The bioorganic hull absorbed much of the impact, but the vessel groaned like a wounded animal. "We need to jump," Michael said urgently. Arya shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "The ship's warp capabilities are still regenerating. We cannot jump for at least another hour." Another impact rocked the ship. The lights flickered and several secondary systems went offline. "We don't have an hour," Michael growled, moving toward the weapons console. "Does this thing have any defenses?" "Limited," Arya admitted. "It was a diplomatic vessel, not a warship." Michael cursed under his breath. "Then we fight with what we have." He activated the communications array. "This is Colonel Michael Hayes to pursuing vessels. I am a registered salvage operator under coalition protection. Stand down or face consequences." The response was immediate, another volley of plasma bolts that struck their starboard side. The ship bucked violently, several console nodes rupturing in showers of golden fluid. "So much for diplomacy," Michael muttered. He switched to the engineering controls, redirecting power from non-essential systems to the shields. It was a temporary solution at best. They were outgunned and outnumbered with nowhere to run. "There is another option," Arya said quietly. Michael glanced at her, noticing the calculating look in her silver eyes. "I'm listening." "There is a planet in this system, Eden. Its atmosphere is saturated with ionized particles that will mask our presence and disrupt their sensors. We can lose them in the upper atmosphere, then land and make repairs." "And what aren't you telling me?" Michael asked, recognizing the careful omission in her tone. Arya hesitated, then said, "Eden is not entirely stable. It was a Novari terraforming experiment during the war. The ecosystem is unpredictable, hostile to most life forms." "Wonderful," Michael said with bitter sarcasm. "Either die in space or die on a death world. Some choice." Another hit rocked the ship, this one penetrating the weakening shields and tearing through a section of the lower deck. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but the damage was severe. "Death world it is," Michael decided grimly. He took manual control of the navigation systems, plotting a course toward the green-blue sphere that hung in the distance. As they approached, the planet's details became clearer. Vast, swirling storm systems and dense jungle canopies covering most of the surface. The pursuing ships followed their weapon systems, charging for another salvo. Michael pushed the damaged vessel into a steep dive, entering Eden's atmosphere at a dangerous angle. The hull began to glow red-hot as friction built up the organic material, straining to maintain integrity. "They're still on our tail," Michael said, checking the rear sensors. "Not for long," Arya replied. She placed both hands on a pulsating node in the center of the control panel. "Brace yourself." Before Michael could react, she channeled a surge of energy through the ship's systems. The nanobiotics in her bloodstream glowed with sudden intensity, creating a network of golden light beneath her skin. The energy traveled from her body into the ship in a massive electromagnetic pulse, erupted from the hull, expanding outward in all directions. The EMP waves struck the pursuing ships, overwhelming their electrical systems. One by one, their engines sputtered and died, leaving them drifting helplessly in the upper atmosphere. Arya collapsed back from the console, her skin pale, the golden glow dimmed to a faint flicker. "What did you do?" Michael demanded, moving to her side despite himself. "Use the nanobiotics as a catalyst," she gasped, her voice weak. "Created an energy feedback loop through the ship's systems." "You could have warned me," Michael said, helping her into a seat. "No time," Arya replied, her silver eyes dulled with exhaustion. "Besides, the look on your face was worth it." Michael shook his head in disbelief. Even at the brink of collapse, she maintained her royal arrogance. But there was no time to dwell on it. The ship was still plummeting toward the planet's surface, its guidance systems compromised by the same pulse that had disabled their pursuers. He returned to the controls, fighting to establish some semblance of a controlled descent. The landscape below rushed up to meet them, a vast jungle of impossible colors, trees taller than skyscrapers, with canopies that glowed with bioluminescent light. There was no sign of clearings or open terrain for a safe landing. "Hang on," Michael warned, bracing himself. "This is going to be rough." The impact was a symphony of destruction. The ship tore a scar through the alien forest shearing trees of pulsating fungus and crystalline flora before finally plowing into the soft, swampy earth of a ravine and coming to a violent halt. The lights died. The engines fell silent. The only sound was the hiss of ruptured conduits and the steady drip of viscous fluid from the ceiling. Michael unstrapped himself, his body bruised and aching. Arya lay slumped over a console unconscious. He checked her pulse, rapid but steady. A soft mewling came from beneath a fallen panel. Michael lifted it carefully to find Apollo miraculously unharmed but thoroughly displeased with the situation. "At least one of us landed on our feet," Michael murmured, stroking the cat's fur reassuringly. He turned his attention back to Arya, who was beginning to stir. "Can you walk?" he asked as her eyes fluttered open. She nodded weakly. "The ship, is it?" "Dead," Michael confirmed grimly. "Or whatever the equivalent is for a living vessel. We need to find shelter before those hunters recover and come looking for us." He helped Arya to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way through the damaged corridors to the main airlock. The door mechanisms were offline, forcing Michael to manually override the system with his combat knife, prying the panels apart. The outer door slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing a world of vibrant, menacing life. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and decay. The jungle was a riot of bioluminescent plants casting the ravine in shifting, multicolored twilight. Strange chittering sounds echoed from the dense undergrowth. Michael checked his equipment, pistol combat knife, emergency med kit, and a portable scanner. Not much to survive on a hostile alien world, but it would have to do. He fashioned a makeshift carrier for Apollo from a storage container, securing it to his pack. "Stay close," he instructed Arya, "and tell me if you sense anything unusual." Define unusual on a planet where the trees appear to be breathing. Arya replied, her strength gradually returning. They set off following the ravine away from the crash site. The terrain was treacherous, the ground beneath their feet a spongy mass of roots and decomposing vegetation. The flora around them seemed to react to their presence. Flowers turned to track their movement. Vines retracted as they passed fungal growths, released clouds of glowing spores that drifted lazily in the humid air. "This was supposed to be your new homeworld?" Michael asked, slicing through a curtain of hanging tendrils that blocked their path. "One of many," Arya confirmed. "The experiment was abandoned when the war turned against us. The bioengineered organisms were left to evolve without guidance. The result is chaotic." As if to emphasize her point, a nearby cluster of bulbous pods suddenly burst, releasing a swarm of iridescent insects that buzzed angrily around them before dispersing into the canopy. "Your people have a gift for creating nightmares," Michael muttered. "And yours have a gift for destroying what they don't understand," Arya countered. Her voice lacked its usual sharp edge, sounding more tired than accusatory. They continued in silence, the exertion of traversing the difficult terrain taking its toll on both of them. As the alien sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows through the jungle, Michael spotted a potential shelter, a shallow cave carved into the side of the ravine, its entrance partially concealed by a curtain of hanging, phosphorescent vines. He approached cautiously, pistol drawn, scanning the interior for signs of occupation. The cave was dry and appeared unoccupied, extending about 20 feet into the rock face. "This will have to do," he decided. "We need rest before those hunters track us down." He helped Arya inside and released Apollo from his carrier. The cat immediately began exploring the confines of their new sanctuary, whiskers twitching at the unfamiliar scents. Michael set up a perimeter alarm using components salvaged from the ship, a crude but effective system that would alert them to any large approaching life forms. Arya watched him work with undisguised curiosity. "You are resourceful for a human," she observed. "Most of your kind would have perished by now." "I've had practice surviving where I'm not wanted," Michael replied dryly, thinking back to the years after the war. The nightmares, the failed reintegration into civilian life, the slow disintegration of his family. As dusk fell fully, the sky turned a sickly shade of green, and a strange shimmering rain began to fall. It wasn't water, but a fine glittering mist that seemed to hum with a low energy. Michael watched with concern as the mist seeped into their cave. "Don't breathe it in," he warned, pulling a filtration mask from his pack and offering it to Arya. She waved it away. "The nanobiotics will protect me from any toxins." "You should use it." Michael hesitated, then donned the mask himself. Almost immediately, he felt a profound disorientation begin to wash over him. The edges of his vision softened. The chittering sounds of the jungle deepened into what sounded like whispers. He looked at Arya. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something he couldn't see. She was muttering to herself in the flowing, sibilant Novari tongue. "The sky is weeping light," she whispered in accented English, a strange, dreamy smile on her face. "They are memories. Can you see them, Colonel? The memories of the dead." "It's a hallucinogen," Michael said, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "Some kind of airborne spore or pollen. We're breathing it in despite the filters." He tried to stand, intending to cover the entrance of the cave with a tarp from his pack, but his limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The cave walls seemed to breathe in and out. The shadows danced, taking on familiar shapes. He saw the faces of his fallen unit, their eyes accusing. "You left us, Commander. You survived. You." He stumbled back, shaking his head to clear it. He looked at Arya, and for a terrifying second he didn't see her. He saw the Novari warrior who had killed Sergeant Collins, the living blade dripping with his friend's blood. His hand went for his knife. "You," he snarled, his mind twisting reality into a nightmare. "You killed them all." Arya scrambled backward, her own perception warped by the hallucinogenic storm. In her eyes, Michael was not a human scavenger. He was one of her sister's elite guards, his face a mask of cold duty, his knife a surgical tool meant to carve the map from her flesh. "You will not take it from me!" she shrieked, her hand darting out to grab a sharp, heavy rock from the cave floor. They circled each other in the confined space, two prisoners of their own trauma, their minds poisoned by the alien air. He was the ghost of her past. She was the ghost of his. He lunged knife first. She swung the rock, aiming for his head. Their movements were clumsy, dreamlike. The blade of his knife sliced her arm. The edge of the rock glanced off his temple, sending a shower of sparks across his vision. He tackled her, and they fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for control. His hand was on her throat. Hers was clawing at his face. They were a breath away from mutual destruction, two feral animals fighting in a cage. And then something broke through the madness. Perhaps it was the raw, desperate contact, the feel of a living, breathing body beneath his hands. Perhaps it was the shared insanity of their situation. But Michael looked down into her terrified chrome eyes and saw not a monster, but a reflection of his own desperate will to survive. A choked, hysterical sound escaped his lips. It might have been a sob. It turned into a laugh, raw, ragged, utterly unhinged. The absurdity of their situation suddenly struck him with full force. Here they were, ancient enemies trying to kill each other on a hostile alien world while hallucinating on spores. It was beyond ridiculous. It was cosmic irony. Arya, seeing the sudden shift in his eyes, stopped struggling. Confusion warred with fear on her face. Then she too began to laugh. It started as a weak chuckle and grew into a full-throated peal of laughter that echoed through the cave, a duet of madness against the backdrop of the whispering storm. They collapsed against each other, the fight completely drained from them, their laughter slowly subsiding into breathless pants. The hallucinogenic fog in their minds seemed to recede, leaving behind a raw, painful clarity. Michael rolled off her, slumping against the cave wall, his head throbbing. "I almost killed you," he said, his voice hollow. "I almost caved in your skull," she replied, her own voice trembling slightly. She touched the shallow cut on her arm, watching a bead of golden blood well up. "We are a terrible pair, you and I." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the shimmering rain. The shared brush with death had shattered the wall of hostility between them, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. "They used a bioagent on me," Michael said quietly, staring into the darkness. "In the prison camp. It gets inside your head, makes you relive your worst moments over and over until you can't tell what's real." He looked at her. This storm, it felt like them. Arya pulled her knees to her chest. "My sister, she was always jealous. I was the heir. She was the spare. When she joined the coup, she designed the torture protocols for enemies of the new state herself." She didn't look at him. She enjoyed finding new ways to break people. I imagine she would find this planet inspiring. In that moment, they were not human and Novari. They were not colonel and princess. They were just two soldiers scarred by the same war, confessing their wounds by a dying light. Arya slowly reached up and unclasped the tunic at her shoulder. She let it fall partly open. The regeneration patch Michael had applied on the ship had already fallen off, leaving behind another faint pearlescent scar. But it was not her shoulder she wanted to show him. She turned slightly, showing him her side. Just below her ribs, a long, jagged scar, thicker and uglier than the others, ran from her back to her navel. The skin was puckered and discolored. It was not a battle wound. It was surgical. "This is where they put it in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They cut me open. They wove the primary conduits of the map directly into my neural pathways. When they were done, they reknit the flesh to hide the seams." Michael reached out his fingers, tracing the edge of the scar, his touch surprisingly gentle. Her skin was warm electric. A current passed between them, a spark of something that had been simmering beneath the surface since they first met. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was something far more dangerous. He looked up from the scar to her face. Her chrome eyes were dark, her lips slightly parted. The space between them became charged heavy with unspoken questions. He leaned in and she met him halfway. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel her breath on his skin. He could see the universe reflected in her eyes. He was going to kiss her. He was going to close that final infinite gap and press his lips against hers. But she pulled back at the last second, shaking her head. A look of profound sadness crossed her features. "You would not survive me, Michael," she whispered. "The nanobiotics, they are part of me now. My kiss, it could be poison to your kind." Before the charged silence could stretch any further, a new sound cut through the jungle, the sharp crack of a plasma rifle. It was close. Shouted commands in a guttural, corrupted dialect followed. Michael was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his own weapon, all thoughts of the near kiss forgotten. "Hunters," Arya shook her head, her expression grim. "Worse. Eden has inhabitants." She peered through the vine-covered entrance. "Castaways, failed colonists, their bodies and minds twisted by exposure to the planet's mutagens." In the eerie glow of the jungle, Michael saw them, a small band of humanoid figures moving through the undergrowth. Their bodies were grotesquely modified limbs, elongated and skin covered in a patchwork of scales and fungal growths. Some had crude imitations of Navari biotech grafted to their frames, glowing veins and makeshift living weapons. "They're heading for the crash site," Michael whispered, "looking for salvage. If they find us, they will tear us apart for the components in our bodies," Arya warned. "The nanobiotics in my blood would be valuable to them." Michael checked the charge on his pistol, half full. "Not enough for a prolonged engagement." "Then we don't let them find us," he said grimly. The Eden colonists moved like predators through the bioluminescent underbrush, their mutated forms silhouetted against the pulsing flora. Michael counted 7 of them, armed with a hodgepodge of weapons, some Terran, some Novari, all deadly. Their communications consisted of guttural clicks and whistles, a corrupted language that had evolved from their isolation. Michael turned to Arya, keeping his voice low. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. Direct confrontation would be suicide." Arya nodded, her mercury gaze reflecting the kaleidoscopic light filtering through the vines. "There is higher ground above the ravine," she whispered. "If we can reach it before they discover our trail, we will have the tactical advantage." She pointed toward a ridge overlooking their position, where the twisted trunks of massive tree-like growths formed a natural fortress. The climb would be treacherous, especially in the fading light, but it offered their best chance of survival. "Apollo stays with me." Michael decided, securing the cat in his makeshift carrier again. The orange tabby seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, remaining unusually quiet as Michael attached the carrier to his back. They slipped out of the cave, staying low and using the dense vegetation as cover. The mutated colonists were now less than 100 yards away, methodically searching the area around the crashed ship. It wouldn't be long before they found the trail leading to the cave. The climb up the ravine wall was arduous. The rock face was slick with the moisture, and the handholds a combination of gnarled roots and crystalline outcroppings cut into their palms. Michael's muscles, still aching from the crash, protested with every foot of elevation gained. Behind him, Arya moved with surprising agility, despite her recent injuries, the nanobiotics in her system working overtime to maintain her strength. They were halfway up when a shout from below froze them in place. One of the colonists had discovered their footprints leading from the cave. The hunting party immediately changed direction, converging on their last known position. "Move faster," Michael hissed, wincing, as Apollo dug his claws into his shoulder in alarm. They reached the ridge just as the first plasma bolts scorched the rock face where they had been moments before. Scrambling over the edge, they took cover behind the massive trunk of a fungal tree, its canopy glowing with eerie blue-green light. "They're coming up after us," Arya observed, peering around the trunk. Michael unholstered his pistol and checked the ammunition again. 7 targets, 12 rounds. Not great odds. "Then we should improve them," Arya replied, her expression turning calculating. She surveyed their surroundings with new intensity. These fungal structures, they're highly reactive to electrical impulses. If we could trigger a cascade reaction, Michael caught her meaning immediately. "Create a diversion. Draw them into a trap." He nodded approvingly. "Military thinking, Your Highness. I'm impressed. I may have been royalty colonel, but I was also trained in imperial combat tactics," she said with a hint of her old arrogance. "My father believed all his children should understand the art of war." They quickly formulated a plan. Michael would position himself as a sniper, targeting the lead colonists when they crested the ridge. Meanwhile, Arya would use a small energy cell from Michael's emergency kit to trigger a bioelectric reaction in the fungal forest, creating a chain of explosions to disorient and scatter the remaining hunters. "Be careful with that," Michael warned as he handed her the energy cell. "One wrong connection and you'll fry yourself along with the fungi." Arya's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Your concern is noted, Colonel." They separated, moving to their positions with practiced stealth. Michael found a natural alcove in the twisted roots that offered both concealment and a clear line of sight to the climbing route. He set Apollo's carrier in a protected hollow, whispering a reassurance to the nervous cat. The colonists were making quick progress up the ravine wall, their mutated limbs perfectly adapted to the terrain. The leader, a massive humanoid with chitinous growths covering half his body, carried what appeared to be a modified Novari plasma lance, a weapon that could reduce a man to ash in seconds. Michael steadied his breathing, falling into the familiar rhythm of a combat sniper. Inhale, aim. Exhale halfway, squeeze. The first shot caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning him off the cliff face. The colonist's scream was cut short by the impact 50 feet below. The remaining hunters scattered, taking cover among the rock outcroppings. Michael fired twice more, forcing them to keep their heads down as Arya completed her work with the fungal network. From the corner of his eye, he saw her hands working with delicate precision, the network of golden energy beneath her skin pulsing as she interfaced with the alien biology. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder that for all her seemingly human traits, Arya belonged to a species that had evolved along a very different path. A plasma bolt sizzled past Michael's head so close he felt the heat sear his cheek. 3 of the colonists had flanked his position and were closing in fast. He shifted, firing again, taking down another hunter with a clean headshot. 4 left. "Priam, whatever you're doing, do it now," he shouted, using her name for the first time since their encounter. As if in response, the fungal forest came alive with light. Pulses of bioelectric energy surged through the network of roots and trunks, building to a crescendo. The first explosion ripped through a cluster of pods to Michael's right, releasing a cloud of luminescent spores that engulfed 2 of the approaching colonists. Their screams turned to gurgles as the spores invaded their respiratory systems. Chain reactions followed, beautiful and horrific in equal measure. The ridge became a symphony of light and sound as fungal clusters detonated in sequence, creating a barrier of spores and flames between the survivors and their prey. Michael used the chaos to retreat to Arya's position. She stood at the center of the maelstrom, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and alarm. The golden patterns beneath her skin pulsed in sync with the fungal explosions, suggesting a deeper connection than she had intended. "We need to move," Michael urged, gripping her arm. "That light show will attract every predator for miles." Apollo meowed in agreement from his carrier ears, flattened against his head in distress. The cat's reaction seemed to snap Arya out of her trance. She nodded, tearing her attention away from the spectacle. They fled deeper into the highland forest, leaving the remaining colonists to contend with the fungal inferno. The terrain gradually changed as they moved inland, less bioluminescence, more conventional vegetation, though still alien in structure and scale. After an hour of hard travel, they found a suitable campsite, a clearing dominated by a massive fallen trunk, hollowed by time into a natural shelter. Michael did a perimeter check while Arya gathered materials for a small fire. Apollo, released from his carrier, prowled the boundaries of the camp, his feline instincts alert for danger. The fire cast a warm glow over their makeshift camp, a stark contrast to the cold, alien light of the jungle. Michael treated a plasma burn on his forearm, a grazing hit he hadn't noticed in the heat of battle. Arya watched him with a thoughtful expression. "You fight well for a man of your age," she observed. Michael snorted. "Is that supposed to be a compliment or an insult?" "Merely an observation," Arya replied. "Most humans of your generation would have perished in the first engagement. I'm not most humans." "No," she agreed softly. "You are not." A comfortable silence fell between them, remarkable given that less than a day ago they had been at each other's throats. Combat had a way of accelerating relationships, forging connections that might otherwise take months or years to develop. They had fought side by side and survived. In the military world, Michael came from that meant something. Apollo settled between them, curling up near the fire, his purring a soothing counterpoint to the alien sounds of the jungle night. The cat's presence seemed to humanize their strange situation, a bridge between two vastly different beings. "How did you end up here, Colonel?" Arya finally asked. A decorated war hero reduced to salvaging scrap from battlefields he once commanded. Michael tensed. It was a question he rarely allowed himself to consider, much less discuss with others. "That's a long story, Princess." "We have time," she said, gesturing to the alien night surrounding them, "and I find I am curious about the man who spared my life when vengeance was within his grasp." Michael stared into the flames, weighing his words carefully. "After the war, I tried to go back. To civilian life. To my family." The fire popped and hissed momentarily, illuminating the lines of regret etched into his face. But the man who came home wasn't the same one who had left. He absent-mindedly stroked Apollo, who had moved to his lap. "My wife Sarah had been fighting her own battle while I was gone, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She'd kept it from me, didn't want me distracted while I was deployed." His voice grew rough with emotion. "By the time I got home, she had weeks left. I spent those final days by her side, watching her slip away, helpless in a way I'd never been in combat." Arya listened silently, her expression softened by the firelight. "After she died, I was lost. My son David wanted me to stay to help him through his own grief. But I couldn't face it, the emptiness, the civilian world that suddenly seemed so meaningless compared to what I'd seen out there." Michael's gaze lifted toward the stars visible through the canopy. "So when the coalition offered veteran officers positions in the post-war reclamation effort, I re-enlisted without hesitation." "And your son," Arya prompted gently. "David saw it as abandonment, said I was choosing dead comrades over living family." "Maybe he was right." Michael's expression hardened. "He cut ties. That was 7 years ago. Last I heard, he was working as a diplomatic attaché on Europa Station. You have not attempted reconciliation." Michael laughed bitterly. "Pride is a hell of a thing, Princess. Runs in the family." He turned the question back on her. "What about you? How does royalty end up on the run, plugged into a dying ship in the middle of nowhere?" Arya's luminescent patterns dimmed slightly, a physiological response to emotional distress that she couldn't fully control. "My story is not so different from yours. When my father was deposed, I was given a choice public execution as a symbol of the old regime's end or service to the new order under my sister's command." "Not much of a choice," Michael observed. "No," Arya agreed, "but I pretended to accept the latter while planning my escape. I believed I could find allies among the old noble houses, gather support to challenge Lyra's claim." Her expression turned rueful. "I was naive. The houses had already aligned with my sister, seeing her militaristic vision as the path to renewed Novari dominance." She traced a finger along the patterns on her arm. "When I discovered Lyra's true plan to restart the war using technologies even my father had considered too dangerous, knew I had to act. My father's loyalists helped me escape, but Lyra's forces were close behind. I barely made it to the ship you found me in." "And the map in your blood?" Michael asked. "What exactly is it?" Arya hesitated, then said, "It is a failsafe. During the final days of the war, as defeat loomed, my father created a backdoor into the Imperial military network, a way to shut down our weapon systems if they ever fell into the wrong hands." "Like your sister's," Michael surmised. Arya nodded. "The encryption was too complex to be stored conventionally. It required a living neural network, specifically one with royal genetic markers. She touched the surgical scar on her side. I volunteered not fully understanding what it would entail. And now you're the only one who can access this back door. Michael said, the implications dawning on him. If Lyra gets hold of you, she will extract the map and use it not to shut down our weapons, but to activate dormant systems throughout the galaxy, Arya finished grimly, including war arcs that your coalition believes were destroyed years ago. The magnitude of the situation settled over them like a physical weight. This wasn't just about a fugitive princess or a bounty anymore. The balance of power in the galaxy hinged on keeping Arya out of Lyra's hands. We need to get off this planet, Michael said firmly. Find a way to either remove that map safely or use it before Lyra can. The ship is beyond repair, Arya reminded him, and your vessel, while intact, lacks the necessary jump capabilities to outrun my sister's forces. Michael considered their options, running through scenarios with military precision. The hunters who were tracking their ship might still be in orbit. If we could find a way to signal it, maybe negotiate. Krell does not negotiate, Arya said flatly, and the colonists will have found our crash site by now, stripped it of anything useful. Then we build a transmitter, Michael decided, strong enough to reach coalition space. I have contacts who might help off the books, of course. Arya raised an eyebrow. And who would these contacts be? Let's just say not everyone in the coalition is thrilled about the current detente with the Novari Empire, Michael said carefully. There are factions that operate outside official channels. Insurgents, Arya translated. Terrorists by my sister's definition. Freedom fighters by others, Michael countered. The point is, they have ships' resources and a vested interest in preventing another war. Arya considered this, her expression troubled. So I trade one form of exploitation for another, become a weapon for your coalition insurgents instead of my sister. No, Michael said firmly. You'd be under my protection. No experiments, no extraction, no exploitation. Just safe passage to somewhere Lyra can't reach you. And why would you offer this? Arya asked, studying him intently. After everything my people did to yours, to you personally, why help me? Michael met her gaze unflinchingly. Because I've seen enough war for one lifetime, princess. And if what you're saying about your sister is true, we're heading for one that will make the last conflict look like a border skirmish. Something shifted in Arya's expression, a softening, a vulnerability breaking through her royal composure. You are a surprising man, Michael Hayes. Yeah, well, don't get used to it, he muttered, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy. Get some rest. We've got a long hike ahead of us tomorrow if we're going to salvage enough components for a transmitter. As Arya settled into sleep, Michael took the first watch, his pistol across his lap, and his thoughts churning with plans and contingencies. Apollo curled up beside Arya, purring contentedly as her hand unconsciously moved to stroke his fur. Michael found himself watching her in the dying firelight, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the faint glow of her skin casting soft shadows. In repose, she looked almost human, almost vulnerable. It was dangerous thinking. She wasn't human. She wasn't vulnerable. She was Novari royalty, a living weapon, and quite possibly the most valuable being in the galaxy right now. He needed to remember that. Keep his distance. Stay professional. But as he watched Apollo's protective stance beside her, Michael felt something stir within him that he'd thought long dead, a protective instinct that went beyond duty or strategic necessity. He pushed the feeling aside. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford, not with both their lives hanging in the balance. The night passed without incident. At dawn, they set out toward the crash site, hoping the colonists had moved on after stripping it of obvious valuables. The jungle was marginally less threatening in daylight, though still alien and unpredictable. Massive flower-like structures opened as they passed, releasing clouds of pollen that thankfully proved non-hallucinogenic. Insectoid creatures with translucent wings buzzed among the canopy, collecting nectar from bioluminescent blooms. This world could have been beautiful, Arya observed as they walked, if the terraforming had been completed properly. Instead, it's a death trap, Michael replied pragmatically. A mirror of its creators, Arya said softly. Grand ambitions, flawed execution. They reached the crash site by midday. As expected, the colonists had thoroughly scavenged the exterior of both vessels. The Lone Wolf had been pried open, its hull plating, stripped and interior gutted. The Novari ship had proven more resistant to their efforts, its bioorganic structure actively fighting against intrusion, but significant damage had been done nonetheless. They missed some things, Michael noted, after a careful inspection. The primary communication array is still intact, buried under a collapsed bulkhead, and your ship's quantum entanglement module might be salvageable. Those components alone would not be sufficient for a long-range transmitter, Arya pointed out. No, but combined with the emergency beacon from my survival kit and the power core from your ship's life support system, we might cobble together something workable. They spent hours salvaging what they could, working in tense silence, constantly alert for signs of the colonists' return. By late afternoon, they had accumulated a modest collection of components, enough for Michael to begin assembling a rudimentary communication device. Apollo proved surprisingly helpful, his small size allowing him to squeeze into tight spaces to retrieve components Michael couldn't reach. As the alien sun began its descent, they returned to their camp with the salvaged equipment. Michael immediately set to work, his engineering training from his academy days coming back to him as he connected circuits and calibrated frequencies. Arya watched him work with evident fascination. "Your species' affinity for mechanical systems is remarkable," she observed. "Novari children are taught to interface with biotech from infancy, but few ever master traditional engineering." "Different evolutionary paths," Michael replied without looking up from his work. "You develop symbiosis with your technology. We develop dominance over ours." As night fell again, Michael completed the transmitter, a jury-rigged contraption of Terran and Novari technology that looked as though it might fall apart at any moment. But when he activated it, the power core hummed to life, and the communication array began scanning for available frequencies. "Now we wait," Michael said, setting the device to broadcast a loop distress signal on a coded coalition frequency. "If anyone's listening, they should pick this up within a few hours." They settled in for another night, taking turns at watch. During his shift, Michael found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here, from decorated officer to bitter scavenger to reluctant protector of an alien princess. Life had a way of writing stories far stranger than any fiction. He was about to wake Arya for her turn at watch when the transmitter crackled to life. A voice distorted by interference but unmistakably human broke through the static. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Marcus Reed of the independent freighter Defiant. We've received your distress call. Please authenticate." Michael's heart skipped a beat. Reed. A name from the past, a fellow officer from the Screaming Eagles who had been reported killed in action during the Battle of Alpha Centauri. How was this possible? He grabbed the transmitter. Marcus Reed. This is Michael Hayes. Authentication code Sierra Echo 994. There was a long pause, then, "Michael, holy shit. I thought you were dead." "Funny, I thought the same about you," Michael replied, a mixture of emotions, disbelief, joy, suspicion washing over him. "Long story, old friend. One best told over a drink rather than an open channel. What's your situation?" Michael glanced at Arya, who had awakened at the sound of voices and was watching him intently. "Complicated. I need extraction from Eden. 2 passengers, minimal gear. But there are complications." "There always are with you, Hayes," Reed responded, a hint of the old camaraderie in his voice. "We can be in orbit within 6 hours. Can you make it to these coordinates?" A series of numbers scrolled across the transmitter's small display. Michael checked them against his mental map of the terrain. "Affirmative. It's a high plateau about 5 miles northwest of our position. We'll be there." "Good. And Michael, be careful. Eden's developed quite a reputation since the war. The wildlife isn't the only danger. Read out." The transmission ended, leaving Michael staring at the device with mixed emotions. "You do not trust him," Arya observed. "Marcus Reed was reported killed 10 years ago," Michael said slowly. "No body was ever recovered, but his fighter was seen taking a direct hit from a Novari cruiser. The probability of survival was calculated at less than 0.1%. Yet here he is," Arya said. "A ghost just like us." "Just like us," Michael agreed grimly. "And that's what worries me. In my experience, people who come back from the dead rarely do so without baggage." By dawn, they had gathered their meager supplies and were ready to move. Michael had spent the night repairing his pistol and fabricating additional ammunition from salvaged materials, a skill taught to all Coalition Special Forces operatives. Apollo seemed to sense the tension, staying unusually close to Michael's heels as they began their trek toward the extraction point. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they moved northwest, steep inclines, dense vegetation, and occasional patches of what Michael could only describe as carnivorous quicksand, pools of viscous fluid that bubbled and reached for anything that came too close. Your friend chose a challenging extraction point, Arya remarked as they skirted another of the deadly pools. Standard procedure, Michael explained. High ground, difficult access, multiple escape routes. Makes it harder for hostiles to stage an ambush. Or easier for your friend to stage one of his own, Arya said quietly. Michael didn't respond. The thought had crossed his mind. Reed's convenient appearance, the remote extraction point, it all could be a setup. But they had few other options. As they climbed higher, the jungle began to thin, giving way to a rocky landscape dotted with crystalline formations that refracted the sunlight in prismatic bursts. The plateau Reed had specified was visible now, a flat-topped formation that rose above the surrounding terrain like a natural fortress. We should rest before the final approach, Michael suggested, finding shelter in the shadow of a large rock formation. Conserve our strength in case things go sideways. As they sat in the shade catching their breath, Arya's expression turned serious. Michael, there is something I need to tell you. Something important. The use of his first name caught his attention immediately. I'm listening. If we do make it off this planet, she began carefully, if we reach safety, there is a way to stop Lyra permanently, to prevent her from ever using the map. I thought you said the map couldn't be removed without killing you, Michael said, frowning. It can't, she confirmed, but it can be used. The core synapse, the central hub from which the old empire controlled its fleets, its armies, its entire biotechnical infrastructure, it can be accessed through the map in my blood. And where is this core synapse? Nova Prime, Arya said softly. My sister's headquarters. Michael stared at her in disbelief. You're suggesting we waltz into your sister's stronghold, the most heavily fortified Novari installation in the galaxy. Not waltz in, Arya corrected. I have a plan. Twist 12. I will surrender myself to Lyra. She explained, her voice steady despite the audacity of what she was proposing. I will present you as my captive, a gift to prove my loyalty. She will believe it. She has always underestimated me, seen me as the weaker, more sentimental sister. And once we're inside, Michael asked, already seeing the dangerous logic of her plan. The core synapse chamber requires two distinct genetic markers to open a failsafe my father implemented to prevent any single person from seizing control. One Novari high blood, she touched her chest, and one non-Novari. She looked pointedly at Michael. You need me, he realized. As I said before, Colonel, you are my key. Michael considered the plan from all angles, weighing the astronomical risks against the potential reward. It's suicide, he finally said, but it might just work. They spent the next hour refining the strategy, identifying potential failure points and contingencies. Apollo watched them work occasionally, batting at the sticks they used to draw diagrams in the dirt. The cat's playfulness was a surreal counterpoint to their deadly, serious planning. As they prepared for the final approach to the extraction point, Michael made a decision. If we're doing this, if we're really going to take the fight to your sister, then I'm all in, Arya. It was the first time he'd used her name without the royal title, a subtle but significant shift in their relationship. She held his gaze, something vulnerable and resolute in her silver eyes. Thank you, Michael. The plateau was as imposing up close as it had appeared from a distance, sheer rock faces rising hundreds of feet, with only one narrow path leading to the top. They ascended carefully, Michael taking point with his pistol, drawn Arya close behind, with Apollo secure in his carrier on her back. They reached the summit just as the alien sun began to set, casting long shadows across the flat expanse of rock. In the center of the plateau was a circular clearing, clearly visible from orbit, the perfect landing zone for a shuttle. Now we wait, Michael said, finding a defensible position near a cluster of rock formations. Reed should be here within the hour. The sky darkened, stars appearing one by one in the alien heavens. Michael found himself studying the constellations, so different from the familiar patterns of Earth's night sky. Here was tangible proof of how far he had traveled from home, not just in light years, but in life choices. A soft hum gradually built in the air around them, barely perceptible at first, then growing to a distinct mechanical vibration. Michael tensed, raising his weapon. Atmospheric entry. Arya observed her enhanced senses, picking up the subtle changes in air pressure. Something's coming down. Within minutes, a bright point of light appeared in the sky, descending rapidly toward the plateau. The shuttle was sleek and predatory in design, clearly military in origin, despite the civilian ID codes it was broadcasting. It touched down with precision at the center of the clearing thrusters, kicking up a cloud of crystalline dust. "Stay behind me," Michael instructed Arya, moving forward cautiously. The shuttle's ramp extended with a pneumatic hiss. A figure appeared at the top, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the practical attire of a frontier freighter captain. As he descended the ramp, features becoming visible in the shuttle's exterior lights, Michael felt a jolt of recognition. It was indeed Marcus Reed, older grayer, with a cybernetic implant visible at his left temple, but unmistakably the same man who had flown on Michael's wing during the Battle of Alpha Centauri. "Hayes," Reed called, a lopsided grin spreading across his weathered face. "You look like shit." "And you look pretty good for a dead man," Michael replied, keeping his pistol at the ready. Reed noticed the weapon but didn't seem offended. "Cautious as ever. Good. You'll live longer that way." His gaze shifted to Arya, eyes narrowing as he recognized her species. "Your complication, I presume." "She's under my protection," Michael stated firmly. "A Novari princess under the protection of a coalition war hero," Reed mused. "The galaxy gets stranger every day." He gestured toward the shuttle. "We can discuss the details en route. My sensors picked up multiple ships entering the system, at least one of them Zendarion in configuration." "Your friend Krell is persistent." Michael hesitated, still not entirely convinced this wasn't a trap. "Where exactly are you taking us, Marcus?" "Concordia," Reed replied, naming the neutral world that housed the Council of Worlds, a diplomatic forum established after the war to mediate interspecies disputes. "Someone there wants to meet your royal companion. Someone with a vested interest in preventing another war." Michael and Arya exchanged glances. Concordia was as good a staging point as any for their plan to infiltrate Nova Prime. It had regular diplomatic traffic to and from all major powers, including the Novari Empire. "All right," Michael decided, "but the first sign of trouble and I'll put a hole in your new shuttle. Are we clear?" Reed laughed, a genuine hearty sound that eased some of Michael's suspicion. "Crystal clear, Colonel. Now shall we depart before our bounty hunter friend decides to join the party?" As they boarded the shuttle, Apollo peered curiously from his carrier whiskers, twitching at the new environment. Reed raised an eyebrow at the cat but made no comment, instead leading them to the passenger compartment, a well-appointed space that suggested Reed's independent freighter business was quite lucrative. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, accelerating into the upper atmosphere with military-grade thrust. Through the viewport, Michael watched Eden recede beneath them, its toxic beauty diminishing to a swirl of colors against the blackness of space. "I assume you'll want the full story," Reed said as he joined them in the passenger compartment, the shuttle now on autopilot. "How I survived where I've been for 10 years. "That would be a start," Michael agreed. Reed poured 3 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "I think we all could use this," he said, offering glasses to Michael and Arya. "Terran whiskey. The real thing, not that synthesized swill they serve in coalition outposts." Michael accepted the drink but didn't immediately consume it. Old military habits died hard. Never take a beverage from a source you can't verify. Arya, sensing his caution, likewise held her glass without drinking. If Reed noticed their hesitation, he didn't comment on it. He took a long sip of his own drink before beginning his tale. "The Battle of Alpha Centauri. My fighter took a direct hit, that much is true. Emergency systems activated, ejected me just before the core breach. I was picked up not by coalition rescue, but by scavengers working the edges of the battlefield." "The coalition listed you as killed in action," Michael said. "There was a memorial service." "By the time I recovered consciousness, the war was over," Reed continued. "The scavengers who found me, a group calling themselves the Freeborn, had no love for either the coalition or the Novari. They were independent thinkers, saw the war as a power play by elites on both sides." "Conspiracy theorists," Michael translated. "Maybe," Reed acknowledged. "But they showed me things, Michael. Intelligence that never made it to official channels. Evidence that elements within the coalition had been looking for an excuse to go to war long before the Novari appeared at the Oort cloud." Michael's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Marcus." I know how it sounds, Reed admitted. I didn't believe it either at first. But the evidence was compelling enough that I decided to stay dead while I investigated further. And what did you find? Arya asked, speaking for the first time since they'd boarded. Reed's gaze shifted to her, reassessing. That there are those on both sides who profit from conflict, Your Highness, who see peace as an impediment to power rather than a goal to strive for. Like my sister, Arya said softly. Among others, Reed agreed. Which brings us to why I was in position to receive your distress call. I've been working with a coalition of like-minded individuals, humans, Novari, and others who believe another war would be catastrophic for all involved. We've been monitoring communications, tracking military movements, gathering intelligence. And what does this coalition of yours want with Arya? Michael asked, the protective edge returning to his voice. Reed's expression turned serious. The same thing you do, I suspect, to keep her out of her sister's hands and prevent the activation of the dormant Novari war machine. Michael and Arya exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. We have a plan, Michael said carefully, but we'll need resources support, which we can provide, Reed assured them. But first we need to get you both to Concordia safely. He nodded toward the viewport where the starscape was beginning to distort as the shuttle prepared for warp jump. Try to rest. It's a 14-hour journey, and something tells me you two haven't had much downtime recently. As Reed returned to the cockpit, Michael finally took a sip of the whiskey. The familiar burn helped settle his nerves, a taste of home in the vastness of space. Do you trust him? Arya asked quietly. Not entirely, Michael admitted, but he's offering what we need: transport resources, potential allies. We'd be fools to refuse, and fools to accept without caution, Arya added. Michael nodded in agreement. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. As Arya settled into one of the comfortable passenger seats, Apollo curled up beside her, purring contentedly. Michael remained alert, pistol within easy reach, eyes periodically scanning their surroundings for any sign of threat. The shuttle entered warp space with a gentle lurch, the starscape outside the viewport transforming into the now familiar tunnel of swirling light. Michael watched the hypnotic patterns, mind churning with plans and contingencies. They were committed now to Reed, to their audacious plan to infiltrate Nova Prime, to a desperate gamble that could prevent a war or start one. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the margin for error couldn't be slimmer. But for the first time in years, Michael felt truly alive. He had a purpose, again something worth fighting for. And as his gaze drifted to Arya sleeping peacefully with Apollo nestled against her, he acknowledged the uncomfortable truth that had been growing within him. She was becoming more than just a mission or an asset. She was becoming someone he cared about. And in their dangerous reality, that might be the riskiest proposition of all.